Hi everyone, my name is Jocelyn Paulus, and this is my final reflection for ECS 210. At the beginning of the semester, I thought I had a pretty well developed idea of what curriculum was. I had practice using curriculum from my ECS 300 field experience where I used the curriculum to plan and design lessons for a grade 7 class. I also knew from other ECS classes that curriculum was more than just a document. It encompasses things we learn at school and things that we learn at home. So I was curious as to what ECS 210 was going to teach me, because I already thought I knew everything there was to know about curriculum. But over the course of the semester, this very comfortable idea of curriculum was challenged multiple times. I was forced to trouble the knowledge of some of the basic beliefs I have about teaching and curriculum. But along the way, my understanding of curriculum and teaching grew exponentially. My first uncomfortable learning experience was the idea of common sense. At the beginning of this class, I had thought common sense was what stopped people from doing and saying stupid things. But after reading Kumashiro, I realized that common sense is the understandings that we have that shape our view of the world. They tell us what is good about the world and what is bad about the world. And more than anywhere else, common sense has a role in the school system. For example, here we believe that school starts in September and ends in June, but it's not like that everywhere in the world. As Kumashiro points out, in Nepal, school actually starts in the middle of February. I learned this semester that common sense creates a lens through which I view my teaching practice, my curriculum, and my students. And if this lens goes unchallenged, I could be recreating oppressive situations in my classroom without meaning to. An example of this is the idea of what makes a good student. I bet if I asked anyone what a good student was, it would go along the lines of this. A good student sits at his or her desk and listens quietly. A good student raises their hand when they wish to speak. A good student works hard and excels and sets high goals for themselves. This is an example of common sense because it reinforces one idea of student learning. It is also an example of common sense that I find particularly troubling because in my high school and elementary experience, I fit into the second two categories of a good student, but I couldn't sit still for the life of me. Did this make me a bad student? I really hope not. This is also problematic when these ideas of good and bad students can subconsciously cause teachers to label and categorize their students. It can harm our students' learning if we treat the good students different than the bad students, and if we put the good students on a pedestal while ignoring the needs of the bad students. The idea of common sense also comes into play when we look at how we teach and how we develop lessons. For me, I always loved learning auditory by listening to my teachers, so this is how I plan my lessons. But what about the students in my class who need more visual help or need more hands-on projects? As a teacher, it is my responsibility to look at these different learning styles and find ways to encompass all these multiple ways of knowing into my classroom. I briefly want to touch on a personal connection to common sense and something that helped me make sense of what common sense was. In ECS 300, I read John Green's Paper Towns, and while I was reading this book, I came across a quote, "A Margot for each of us, and each more mirror than a window." In the contents of the book, the main characters are searching for their friend Margot who has run away. While Q, one of the main characters, realizes that even though they're looking for the same person, the way that they describe Margot makes her sound like completely different person because they cannot see her outside of their own personal frame of reference. In context of ECS 210, I realized that the mirror that Q talks about is very much like my common sense. My mirror or common sense reflects the easy or comfortable understandings I have of the world, and because I can only see those understandings, there will be no room for troubling knowledge. However, to challenge my common sense understandings means seeing the world through a window, with no comfortable realizations reflecting back at me. This semester, I learned that challenging common sense is hard, because you have to re-examine the ways in which you think, which means confronting the comfortable common sense understandings that you have of the world. This process takes time. It is one where you must re-examine, question, and relearn some of the basic beliefs you have about the world. It's not something that is going to happen overnight. There are many points in the semester where I felt like giving up because I was uncomfortable with what I was learning. But over time I realized that troubling knowledge will help me build an anti-oppressive teaching practice as well as develop an anti-oppressive classroom. The second example of an uncomfortable learning experience was in the form of this blog prompt. After I began to re-examine my autobiography, I realized that I did indeed forget to include parts of my identity that I was white, I am straight, and I am female. This led me to question what I had intended to include in my autobiography and what happened when I left some things out that make up integral parts of my identity. I realized that by leaving out the parts of my identity that say that I am white, I am straight, and I am female, I am portraying the idea of being white, female, and straight as normal and placing it above any other type of identity. This was an important lesson for me because it showed me again how my understanding of what is important to include or leave out can reinforce oppressive ways of thinking. It also made me reflect on the lecture historic curriculum that Mike taught, where we learned that the normal schools taught teachers to see and teach to a hierarchy of race that portrayed the white people at the very top. I used to think that this can't happen in today's society, but after realizing that I actually portrayed my identity as normal and above everything else, I began to realize that I was reinforcing this historic curriculum. Maybe not as openly as it had, but I had reinforced it. The treaty education workshop was not one of my troubling moments, but it was one of my favorite lectures that we had. I have had a lot of questions about treaty education, and this workshop and lecture helped me to answer some of them. Some of the questions or realizations that I had during Claire's lecture were that we are all treaty people. Do not be afraid to ask for help when teaching treaty education. Students are interested in treaty education, and that it is okay to make mistakes when we teach treaty education as long as we learn and grow for them. Moving forward, I have one more type of question that I would like to answer. What type of teacher do I want to become? I want to be a teacher who encourages students to see mistakes as opportunities to grow. I want to create ways to encompass multiple different learning styles in my classroom. I want to be aware of my privilege as white, female, and straight, and to see how this privilege and common sense will play into my teaching practice. I want to incorporate social justice and treaty education in meaningful ways, and I want to allow my students to develop and become confident in their own voice. So in conclusion, I have learned that curriculum is more than just a document. My common sense understanding of the world needs to be critically examined. I need to realize that my race, gender, and sexuality cannot be ignored as they make up an important part of my identity. I need to be aware of the understandings that my common sense constructs. And finally, I learned that teaching is a complex job because you must constantly challenge what you know and what you believe. But it is also an incredibly rewarding job. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.